So I'm the engineering manager at Opti, so I work in our operations division. We have a large development team that basically runs all of the platforms. So we're a software as a service company, which means that the main value add we bring to the market is integrating disparate forms of information. So what Opti does is predictive control of stormwater infrastructure. And the way we do that is we connect on-site information, maybe the water level in the tank or in a pond, with the weather forecast. And we combine that in the cloud using Microsoft Azure, using algorithms to make a predictive decision about how to best manage that water. And what that does is it shifts the timing in ways that aren't possible with passive systems, which is kind of the status quo. And with that, you get a number of downstream effects, whether it's mitigating the amount of combined sewer or raw sewage that gets discharged into the Charles River, per se, or improving the water quality on site just by shifting the timing of when it's released. So by bringing that software innovation into a traditionally civil engineering field of stormwater management, we see that a lot of room for innovation and disruption in bringing new solutions to that market. No, so I've been involved fairly early on, so since about 2011 when I was still an undergrad in school. So I was getting my degree in civil engineering at MIT, and that's when I met Marcus Quigley through a mentorship program. At the time we were at Geosyntec Consultants. So Opti, the idea and kind of the technology has been around since about 2009, 2010. And was started in Geosyntec, which is a kind of a mid-sized specialty consulting firm focused on civil and environmental engineering. And with that, we received a number of kind of early grants. One was from WRF, the Water Environment Resource Foundation. And with that, we had a number of smaller clients where we were able to kind of prove out the technology and see if there was really a market for it. And then with that, we picked up a number of clients and the contracts got a little bit bigger. And from there, we decided that the business models were different enough. Opti really isn't a consulting business. It's more of a software as a service business is how we found we wanted to structure it. And with that, we sought outside funding and we spun out recently, only last year, to form an independent company to really focus on commercializing and bringing this technology in a scalable way out to the market. So the main, I guess, what makes stormwater different than other waters, as you mentioned, it's all driven by the rain, which is out of our control. It's unpredictable, in any, certain way, right? I mean, we can get close, but you can't predict the next large event or if you're even going to be close or not. And with rapid urbanization, especially in cities where the majority of the population lives, places like Boston, New York, metropolitans all over the world, the infrastructure that's under the ground, the pipes that manage the stormwater are older and typically undersized. And so when you keep building and the pipes and the infrastructure can't keep up, you have an issue with timing, right, and the rate of water that comes off. So when it rains on places like concrete and roofs, the water runs off very quickly and it has to go into these pipes to get treated or eventually properly managed. But if those pipes are already full and they can't manage that capacity, then the water has nowhere else to go. And so what it does in most cases are in places that have what are called combined sewer overflows, where the sewage from a building and the stormwater goes to the same pipe. That water mixes and then it just gets discharged right out into the Charles River or to the Hudson Bay or other public water bodies. And this happens in over 700 cities across the country in the United States alone, right? So urbanization is the main driver of why stormwater is becoming an issue. But with that, it's not just the larger storms. In a lot of places, this happens even as small as maybe a quarter of an inch of rain, you start seeing some issues. But also with that, because the water is running off much more quickly, it doesn't have time to naturally attenuate or be treated on site. And so the water, not only is more of it running off, it's dirtier because it hasn't had time to sit around. So what does that mean? Well, as climate changes and as cities continue to grow and develop in ways that are manageable but not entirely predictable, you need adaptive solutions to manage the issue of stormwater, which makes it a little bit different than other types of water. So historically, civil engineering manages this with passive systems. So for example, you might have a detention tank that's a large tank that goes underground. It'll fill up when it rains to hold back, act as a buffer for the stormwater, and then it will slowly release it. But it's designed for maybe one type of storm, one design storm, the 10-year, 24-hour storm, for example. But as the frequency of storms changes and the patterns change, that one tank, even though it was maybe performing well at one point, won't necessarily be making that most optimal decisions for the future. And so what Opti does is combining the weather forecast in real time with on-site data to make an active decision for any size storm, big, small, or otherwise. We see that as a much more scalable solution, but also a much more resilient solution for actively manage the issue of stormwater. That's one of the major drivers. So based on the regulatory framework in the United States, driven by the EPA's Clean Water Act, they hand out permits or requirements for how municipalities or large land managers have to manage their stormwater. So the EPA, you might have heard of consent decrees. So a lot of cities are faced with consent decrees where the EPA is enforcing the Clean Water Act and enforcing them to basically solve the issue of combined sewer overflows. And that results in cities spending several millions, if not billions of dollars at times to improve their infrastructure to address this issue. So a lot of times it is cities, but also the cities will then take those compliance regulations and pass those on to private landowners through different stormwater taxes or stormwater fees, because they can't always address the issue by themselves. They need help of private developers. So Opti primarily targets large cities such as New York, DC, Portland, Chicago, but also large landowners. So whether it's commercial developments or developers out in suburban areas where they'll take basically undeveloped land and then add a bunch of houses and parking lots. So now you're creating the issue of stormwater that before wasn't an issue. So those are kind of our two main targets: large companies and then large cities. So far, it's still fairly young in the story, which is the exciting part. So I feel like I've been working at a 6-month-old company for 4 years. So I mentioned Opti, the idea and the technology has been around since about 2009, 2010 when we first filed the patent on the algorithm that does this predictive control. And then we grew through the early growth phase under Geosyntec, and then from there only in December spun out to form an independent company focused on really commercializing this technology. So far it's been very good, and we've gotten a lot of traction, but it's a very big market, and one of the themes of today's conference has been kind of how slow civil engineering processes take, and they're very conservative. And so although it has been a success so far, we have a lot of work to do.